The heather and gorse were bent under the wind's unseen fury as it roared across Dartmoor like a wounded animal. Each drop of rain tapped with the urgency of 1,000 tiny fists as it cut sideways on Eliza Hartley's cottage's window panes. Halfway between a sip of chamomile tea and the soft crackle of the fire, she sat on the edge of her recliner, gasping for breath. The storm had advanced more quickly than predicted. Typical Moor weather is harsh and erratic. Then something else arrived, not the rain or the wind. Faint. Far away. A noise out of place in the storm. The cry of a horse. Not just any whinny. A shout? In a desperate situation. Getting pierced. Halfway to her lips, she froze. Eliza briefly believed it to be a fox's screech turning into something horse-like in the wind, or that it was simply the wind acting fancifully once more. But it returned, rising above the howl and more clearly this time. From the moor came a voice. By themselves? Her heart thumped. She got up and struggled to find her boots. It didn't matter anymore that her Land Rover was still muddy from the previous rescue attempt at Hawthorn. She picked up the ancient army surplus jacket, which had a slight fragrance of peat and old hay, her flashlight, and a waterproof camera sling. The wind almost knocked her back when she opened the door. With her hood slamming against her cheeks, she braced herself before running toward the barn and locking the door behind her. Even if it was closer than previously, the mare's call was still quite distant in the darkness. With each step soaking deeper into the moor mud below, she passed the rows of feed bins and the deserted paddocks. Already, her boots were leaking. Her Land Rover's headlights pierced the rain like dull blades. As the storm tossed the moorland like a shipwrecked sea, she pushed it into gear and drove out toward the edge of her family's property, headlamps bouncing over boulders and patches of grass. Even though there was almost no visibility, she didn't care. She could still hear that scream in her ears. The trail turned into wild land about 2 miles out. After parking, she took out her flashlight and went outside. The wind was harsh and stinging now, cutting through canvas and wool layers. Her flashlight beam danced across the moor as she examined the darkness. Nothing. Then? A silvery flash in the rain. She initially believed it to be a trick of the light. Then it moved, though. Consciously? Slowly. In her direction? A dapple grey, wild, barefooted horse with a mane blown sideways like sea foam in a hurricane emerged from the shadows. Her eyes glinted just right, alert but not frightened or panicked. Evaluating? As if she'd been anticipating it. Eliza gasped in surprise. The horse did not run away. Wasn't bashful. Her nostrils flared, she stood resolutely against the rain. She then turned and walked, no, beckoned, into the darkness while tilting her head and flicking her ears. For the smallest moment, Eliza paused. Then she went after it. With the exception of the wet crunch of boots and the shriek of the wind, they moved across the moor in quiet. Leading without hesitation, the mare, Astra, as Eliza would eventually call her, waded like a phantom through the uneven landscape. Eliza's flashlight beam could hardly keep up. The rain got heavier. The smell of moist moss and ozone filled the air. Thunder shattered the night somewhere far behind. The mare came to a halt. The ears pricked. Eliza approached her and pointed her flashlight in the direction she wanted to go. She spotted him at that point. A pile in the bog, little different from the soggy bracken and black dirt. Then it began to twitch. Legs jerked. An unruly, aggressive movement. With her heart racing, Eliza hurried forward. The animal was a stallion. The flank rose and fell in weak, laborious breaths, the chestnut coat drenched and shaking, and flecked with dirt and foam. Blood, thick and slippery, was streaking down his haunch and pooling close to his belly, and his eyes were rolled partly back. Oh no! Oh no! Eliza slammed her equipment into the muck as she fell to her knees. Her hands scrambled for the small medical kit she always carried, for bandages, for gauze. The stallion let out a low moan as he kicked once more. For a fraction of a second, lightning illuminated the moor like daylight, allowing her to see the severe wound on his shoulder. Not from a tumble. This had been torn, no. A fresh, crimson, jagged gash. Perhaps wire. Or worse? Astra, the mare, remained still behind her, her body tilted against the breeze. As Eliza worked, she moved forward to protect the stallion with her flank, seemingly protecting him from the storm itself. The motion was purposeful, defensive. As Eliza applied gauze to the cut, her fingers shook. Rain streaked the lens as her camera dangled over her shoulder, forgotten for the moment. She looked up. Astra was observing her. Not wary. Not crazy. Observing. "Who are you?" Eliza muttered. She didn't anticipate a response. However, the horse gave a soft snort before lowering her head and briefly touching Eliza's arm with her snout. After that, she looked back at the stallion. Eliza realized then that this was no coincidence. There was more to this than a horse abandoned. They had transported this stallion. Dragged. Subtle ruts in the grass and a broken line in the mossy ground behind his body were the telltale indicators. Not new, but sufficiently recent. He had been abandoned here. Let him perish. Additionally, Astra had gone to seek assistance. With rain trickling from her hood, Eliza slumped back on her heels, completely saturated. Her camera flickered to life somewhere behind her, recording without her conscious awareness. Her heart was racing. This marked the start of something much greater than she could have ever dreamed. With Dr. Priya's arrival, Astra's ongoing guardianship, and the first indication that this isn't merely abandonment, it may even be criminal, Part 2 will go right into the emergency rescue. Are you prepared for Part 2 to begin? You stated. Hi Viet Fan 2900 Tu Du Len, Viet Lean Mach Cow Tu, Dung Quen Non Nu Tiang An Mai Cho Toi Het Kak Fan, Theo Dan Y Acute Toi Da Gui. According to ChatGPT. Of course, this is Part 2, which picks up where Part 1 left off. In order to raise the stakes, it uses vivid detail, slight additional tension, and powerful emotional pace while sticking to American English. Field Rescue in the Cutting Wind Part 2. In rough gasps, the stallion's breathing sounded like ripped fabric. Feeling the tremble of his body beneath the skin, Eliza pushed her palm on his side. The mud surrounding him was a slurry of crimson, peat, and rain, but the blood had slowed a little. Her fingers were numb and trembling from cold and adrenaline, and her knees fell further with each movement. Her time was limited. Hypothermia. Startle. Loss of blood. If she didn't move quickly, any one of those may take him. She struggled for her phone in her coat pocket with one hand while using her body to protect the screen from the rain. Before she was able to tap Dr. Priya Desai, the emergency contact, her fingers lit twice. 3 rings. Then there was a click. I have a stallion, Priya. In poor condition. On the moor, close to North Tor, bleeding out. He has a gash all the way down to his muscle. It appears to be wire. Or worse? He's grabbing. Just you. As usual, Priya's voice was even, composed, and focused. No. A mare is present. I followed her here. She is protecting him. It's crazy. I have the truck and I'm 20 out. Maintain pressure. If he begins to kick, stop him from rolling. After hanging up, Eliza put both hands back on the stallion's wound. She grounded them both by pressing down with all of her effort and whispering continuous gibberish, anything to keep her voice present. The stallion shivered, and twitched its legs as it moaned once again. With a feeble kick, one hoof barely touched her hip. With her forelock blown sideways by the wind, Astra, who was still standing next to them, lowered her head. After sniffing the stallion's neck, she went back to face the Moor, her ears perked up. Observing. It had been 15 minutes when Eliza's flashlight died. The only sources of light were the Land Rover's flickering dashboard in the distance and the sporadic lightning strikes that briefly illuminated the surrounding area. Behind them, headlights abruptly climbed a slope. Later, as the tires slid across the soggy grass, Priya's truck's deep diesel growl moaned into the air. Eliza felt a sense of relief that was like a second wave of fatigue. The door of the truck banged. Through the downpour, Priya emerged with a medical bag slung under one arm and a headlamp affixed to her forehead. She called, "Get clear. If he bucks, hold his head." Just as Priya sank on one knee without hesitation, Eliza scurried sideways. She examined the cut, snarled gently between her teeth, and took off the bandage Eliza had put on. "That's profound. Torn muscle, possibly even tissue. You did well to slow it down." Now that assistance had come, Eliza's hands shook more violently. "I believe he was abandoned here. Behind him, there are drag marks." Priya didn't raise her gaze. Data. "Since January, I have witnessed 3 instances similar to this." Taking out a portable 4, she threaded the line as quickly as she had practiced. Eliza's fingers slipped on the chilly plastic as she held the saline bag above her head. The stallion's eyes fluttered as it shuddered once more. Simple. With a voice like warm tea in a storm, Priya whispered to the horse, "Just breathe." Astra moved in closer. Eliza felt her shoulder on her back. The mare appeared to be intent, strangely serene. The smell of blood, the needles, and the stallion's faint whimper didn't make her wince. She exuded stability, akin to an ancient guardian keeping watch over injured relatives. After taking out her chip scanner, Priya ran it over the stallion's neck. Beep. Eliza and she both froze. "Is he chipped?" Eliza leaned closer. "Yes. Yet nothing compares to what I've seen. The local registration does not have it." With a frown, Priya accessed the DEFRA database. A second went by. "No. The passport is incorrect or absent. The system does not match this number. It can be an old breeder tag or data that has been purposefully manipulated." Eliza's stomach dropped. "So, someone is attempting to hide their tracks. It appears that way." Overhead, the storm roared louder. Like faraway drums, thunder swept across the hills. Eliza glanced at Astra before turning back to the stallion, whose convulsions were lessened by the fourth. A drone's high-pitched hum pierced the gale from behind. Eliza turned to see Archie Doyle, who was just 17 years old, standing a few yards away with his hood up and his camera goggles reflecting the headlights of the Land Rover. He took his controller out of his coat and stated, "The drone has been up for 20 minutes. I discovered something." He handed her the screen of the phone. Shaky but clear footage from just before Eliza had arrived scrolled by. The silver flash of Astra appeared from a woodland edge as the drone panned across the moor. Then, as if something heavy had been dragged, it zipped more east and saw a long, shallow rut slicing through the peat. "You see that?" Archie gestured. He zoomed in and said, "And these here, boot prints. 2 sets. At the drag marks, they come to an end." Priya glanced behind him. They left him. Despite the cold, Eliza felt anger boil her chest. And let him perish. Grimly, Archie nodded. About a mile east, right before the ancient peat road, the drone detected a trailer tire trace. They may have backed in there. Priya cleaned her hands and stood up. Eliza, this is an instance of cruelty. With the marks of dumping and that wound. It goes beyond simple neglect. This is illegal. Slowly, Eliza nodded while keeping her gaze fixed on the stallion. His name is Rowan, she uttered quietly. I'm not sure why. But that's his appearance. Priya gave her a quick look but remained silent. Astra chuckled gently and moved forward once more, and Eliza's heart broke at how tender the gesture was. The mare gave Rowan's mane a little prod before turning to face the Moor as if anticipating something different. As if danger was still present. Or as if she was aware that the worst was yet to come. With the discovery of the microchip, the potential legal ramifications under the Animal Welfare Act, and the initial hints linking this to a larger pattern of unlawful abandonment, Part 3 will introduce Inspector Maeve O'Donnell, and expand the investigation. Should we move on to Part 3? You stated. Hi Viet Fan 3900 Tu Du Len, Viet Lien Mach Cow Tu, Dung Quen Nu Tiang Ar Mai Cho Toa Het Kak Fan, Theo Dan Y Acute Poi Da Bui. According to ChatGPT. Of course, this is Part 3, which adheres to your thorough blueprint while retaining its subtle dramatization and engrossing storytelling. The legal stakes are raised, Inspector Maeve O'Donnell is introduced, and the mystery of Rowan's abandonment is further explored in this section. Part 3, The Law, the Vet, and the Microchip. By dawn, the rain had not stopped. With water flowing in rivulets down the stone walls lining the tiny farm roads, Dartmoor was still drowning under a leaden sky. Even though the storm had subsided, the wind continued to whisper secrets that no one wanted to hear while dragging long fingers across the heather. With her arms folded tightly across her chest and her gaze focused on the temporary stall they had set up inside the former hay barn, Eliza stood at the paddock fence. Inside, and 4-bag was still attached to a rail above Rowan's head, as he lay covered in layers of straw and dry blankets. With the help of a portable heat lamp connected to a generator and Priya's nightly labor, his eyes were now half-lidded, feverish but steady. Astra was standing outside the barn doors. All night long, she had not ventured far. She hadn't even had any food. Like a statue made of silver and mist, she waited motionless and serene. Eliza took a quick look at her watch. The inspector from the RSPCA arrived late. She had worked for years to gain the trust of the free-roaming horse population in the Dartmoor area, so she didn't like the thought of involving the authorities, but this was different. Rowan had been abandoned to perish. It was impossible to ignore. She turned to listen to the crunching of gravel. With its headlights dimmed in the morning fog, a dark Vauxhall 4x4 rolled into view. A tall woman with her coat flaring and her badge securely pinned to her collar emerged as the driver's door opened. The woman approached her and introduced herself as Inspector Maeve O'Donnell of the RSPCA. You're Eliza Hartley, must be. Eliza held out a hand and nodded. O'Donnell's hold was firm and professional. Her expression was solemn, professional, and not rude. This morning, I received your note. The report from Dr. Desai was included. As usual, thorough. Eliza answered, she spent the majority of the night there. If not, Ryan wouldn't have made it. O'Donnell's eyebrow went up. You gave him a name? He merited it. Together, they made their way to the barn. The smell of damp hay, disinfectant, and horse perspiration filled the air as soon as the temperature touched inside. As they got closer, Rowan moved a little, opening his nose and twitching one ear in their direction. As he moved closer, O'Donnell muttered, "Poor boy." With her hands on her knees, she knelt next to him and examined the wound with trained eyes. This wasn't a straightforward mishap. "No," Eliza replied. "The Moor has drag marks on it. Archie captured them on video from a drone." O'Donnell raised his head. "Archie Doyle. From the Youth Council for Wildlife. He joins me in volunteering. The video files have already been removed." "All right. That will be beneficial." Eliza offered her the scanner that Priya had left behind. "He was run by us last night. Although he's chipped, it's strange." After turning it on, O'Donnell rubbed it around Rowan's neck. Beep. It was the same distinct sound. She typed the number after tapping into her portable tablet. "Oh. What? This chip is in use." However, the passport record shows a discrepancy. She scowled as she looked over the information. Fletcher, a gelding, is the owner of Chip. Wales registered. However, this stallion, named Rowan, is obviously unharmed. So it's not real. Sitting back on her heels was O'Donnell. It might be a copy. Or, in order to avoid paying costs, someone moved chips from a dead horse. It's a legal red flag in any case. Chips and equine passports must match PDEFRA regulations. It is a breach to not update. Eliza let out a breath and rested against the wall. What comes next? We're looking at a violation of the Cat Welfare Act 2006 if the cat was abandoned, which is likely based on the video, the injuries, and what Priya said. Possibly a breach of the 2015 Control of Horses Act as well. Eliza remarked, "I've read about fly-grazing cases before. Usually entails smuggling horses onto private or public property without authorization, correct?" "Exactly," said O'Donnell. "Some owners utilize it to cut expenses, particularly during the winter months when feed prices are at their highest. But leaving a wounded horse behind, that is criminal neglect. And Rowan isn't the only one. We might be dealing with something more serious if this is a recurring pattern." Eliza nodded, her chest tensing up. "What if they return? Who left him? We'll put this property on temporary hold. Official protection under the Welfare Act's Section 9. You are free to continue providing care. However, I will have to address the local council. I'll also need your video." Eliza went to retrieve the SD cards from her camera bag. "Everything is here. Archie's drive also contains the drone footage. I can grant you access." O'Donnell put the cards in his pocket. "Thank you. This will be taken directly to enforcement." They both turned at that moment when there was a soft knock on the barn door. Archie was standing there with his phone up. "I discovered something else," he declared. The trailer tire pattern was the same as it was the previous evening. It heads west in the direction of Whitcomb Hill. Eliza's mouth tightened. Numerous times, she had driven past Whitcomb Hall, with its tall gates, lengthy driveways, and immaculate paddocks. One of Devon's most influential landowners, Sir Alistair Whitcomb, has a long family history of horse breeding. However, in conservation circles, his name has been mentioned numerous times in relation to lost horses, odd sales, and unapproved breeding cuts. O'Donnell went outdoors and peered over the horizon of the moorland. In the distance, the Whitcomb estate's form was obscured by fog. She asserted that if someone from Whitcomb abandoned this horse, they were either becoming reckless or desperate. Eliza took a deep breath. "He has the funds to hide this." With composure, O'Donnell remarked, "I've defeated bigger men. But evidence is the first step." She turned around and headed back to the barn. Ensure Rowan's safety. I will contact you by tomorrow. What about Eliza? Yes. Retain your phone handy. Things can get bad if this affects more than one horse. Tension will increase in Part 4 as rumors start to circulate through the village, tensions between traditional graziers and conservationists increase, and suspicion begins to grow toward Whitcomb Hall. Are you prepared for Part 4 to begin? You stated. Hi Viet Fan 4900 Tu Du Len, Viet Lean Mach Cow Tu, Dung Quen Non Nu Tiing An Mai Cho Toa Het Kak Fan, Theo Dan Y Acute Toi Da Gui. According to ChatGPT. Yes, this is Part 4, which continues in American English and features improved emotional pacing and fluid storytelling. This section introduces increasing public tension, intensifies the social conflict, and focuses the story on Whitcomb Hall. Part 4, Estate Silence, Village Tensions. It was the most people the village hall had seen since the Jubilee. It was crowded, with a couple of local councillors trying not to look out of place, a few teenagers with hoodies still dripping from the Moor, pony club mothers in raincoats, and farmers wearing flat caps and mud-stained boots. Steam from wet jackets and half-spoken accusations filled the air, and folding chairs brushed against ancient wooden floors. Eliza was seated close to the front, her fingers clenched around the edge of her chair. With its screen stuck on the thumbnail of a video she wasn't sure she was ready to show, her laptop was propped up on her knees. Under Tom Bennett's supervision, Astra and Rowan had remained in the barn. He had insisted that she leave without concern. He had given her a flash drive as a precaution, saying, "People need to hear the truth." Mrs. Crawley, the chairwoman, pounded her gavel on the table with keen eyes. The community grazing renewal was the original topic of tonight's meeting, she stated loudly above the muttering. However, because of recent occurrences, I think there are some more pressing issues. There was a surge of whispers, glances, and a few acerbic glances directed at Eliza, as the murmuring increased. A man got to his feet. Stocky, in his mid-60s, with a voice like bales of hay and gravel. What about the stallion who was abandoned? He uttered those words. Let's just call it that. That is the reason we are here. He wasn't just dumped, said a second voice, this one from a woman with a conservation trust badge. He was in a bog, bleeding out. Abandoned to perish. After a hush of agreement, there was a snicker from behind. A tall, red-faced man with a bullhorn voice said, or he wandered off and broke his leg. Eliza, not every loose horse is a scandal. The room fell silent when that name was spoken. Slowly, Eliza stood up. Despite having wet hands, she spoke more steadily than she had anticipated. That horse was pulled across the moor by someone. His passport and the microchip he had didn't match. He wasn't crazy. They put him in. Furthermore, Astra, the mare who introduced me to him, doesn't do that for everyone. The man with the red face folded his arms. Are you implying that someone from this area did it? Do you think we're criminals? Someone from somewhere knows how to make horses vanish, I said. Near the front, a woman wearing a wool shawl held up a hand. She stated, there have been rumors for months. I heard that 3 people went missing during the autumn roundup. From the herd of my cousin. He applied to the Commoners' Council but was turned down. There was a rumble of whispers throughout the room. With her laptop in hand, Eliza took a step forward. She stated, I didn't come here to make accusations. However, I do have video. I believe everyone should watch it. Mrs. Crawley gave a nod. All right, Ms. Hartley. Eliza plugged her laptop to the projector after walking over. The screen flashed to life as the room grew quieter. The drone video showed Astra walking across the moor in the moonlight, her silver coat appearing ghostly via the infrared lens. Then the slow pan to the boot prints, drag marks, and rut on the turf. The pictures shouted more than words, even though the audio was quiet. As the scene shifted to show Eliza kneeling next to Rowan with her hands pressing to his wound and Astra braced against the wind, gasps resounded. The last clip shows the mismatch error on the DEFRA tablet after Priya's voice calmly reads Rowan's microchip code. Eliza cut the video short. There was silence for a full 5 seconds. A white-haired, weathered old man toward the back then removed his hat and pressed it to his chest. His voice was full of emotion. He remarked, "She went for help." "That mare?" She sought assistance after realizing he was dying. A collective breath was released by the room. Glasses were wiped by Mrs. Crawley. I think this shifts the conversation's tone. However, tension persisted like storm-related fog. A young ranger got up, clean-shaven, with his badge attached to his fleece. "One name keeps coming up," he remarked. "We can no longer ignore it." He gave Eliza his full attention. "Have you been filming outside of Whitcomb Hill?" Slowly, Eliza nodded. "Tire treads were tracked by my drone operator from the site. They head in the direction of Whitcomb Hall." Someone in the crowd took a sharp gasp. Although Sir Alistair Whitcomb was not present because he was not often present at such events, his shadow was seen across the community. For kilometers, his estate was the biggest. He served on half a dozen rural advisory committees, supplied private purchasers, and bred competition ponies. He was strong. Untouchable. Or so the saying went. "We cannot accuse without evidence," Mrs. Crawley hurriedly stated. The young ranger retorted, "We don't need proof to ask questions. The figures don't add up. The registered foals from 2 years ago do not correspond with the estate's herd numbers. I personally reviewed the entries. A gap exists." Heart-pounding, Eliza moved away from the projector. It was necessary to walk on this hazardous terrain. "It's not just a breach of trust if someone from Whitcomb is fly-grazing or offloading injured animals to avoid winter fees," she remarked. "The law is being broken by them." Another man, a commoner with decades of grazing rights, rose up. He had a long coat and a grizzled beard. He glanced at Eliza and the audience. He stated, "My father knew Alistair's father. They would have confronted this head-on in the past. We require answers. We also have to keep the horses safe. Even those that people might want to forget." Low agreement rumbled through the gathering. The rain had ceased outside. The air was heavy and still. Eliza took a breath of fresh air as the crowd started to disperse in tiny groups. She didn't feel like she had won. She felt vulnerable. Pulling a scarf over his chin, Tom Bennett approached her side. "They're agitated," he declared. "But exercise caution. Whitcomb and other men don't lose in silence." Eliza nodded as she gazed into the morning mist that shrouded the estate on the far ridge. She declared, "I don't want any noise. I desire the truth." Eliza will meet Sir Alistair Whitcomb in person at the estate in Part 5, it will be a chilly, quiet exchange filled with power struggles, subliminal threats, and a startling new revelation that Archie has surreptitiously recorded. Should we move on to Part 5? You stated. Fan 5900 Tu Du Len, Viet Lean Mach Cow Tu, Dung Quen Mon Nu Tiang An Mai Cho Toi Het Kak Fan, Theo Dan Acute Toi Da Gui. According to ChatGPT. Yes, this is Part 5, which is written in American English, and has a seamless, captivating narrative flow. Eliza and Sir Alistair Whitcomb's icy exchange and the foreboding change in power relations as secrets start to come to light at the estate are the main topics of this section. Part 5, Meeting the Estate in Person. Whitcomb Hall's gates, which were iron-forged, moss-flecked, and surrounded by two stone griffins that gazed down like silent sentinels, were older than the majority of the adjacent villages' structures. Just outside of them, Eliza sat in her Land Rover with the motor running and her breath misting the inside of the windshield. She had made a previous call. She was informed by the housekeeping that Sir Alistair will pay her a quick visit in the afternoon. That was not what she had anticipated. At precisely 3 o'clock, the gates creaked open. A groundskeeper in uniform nodded sternly at her. Tires crunching like brittle bones over gravel, she rolled through. With its stone, ivy, and icy grandeur, the estate rose from the moorland like a forgotten house from a Bronte story, and the driveway curved softly up toward it. In far-off paddocks, horses grazed, their shapes blurred behind misty fences. The middle walkway was flanked by well-kept lawns and hedges, as if no actual weather had ever touched this area. She parked close to the front door and got out. As she ascended the stone steps, the wind nipped at her coat. The hefty wood door was silently, and precisely opened by a butler. "Miss Hartley. Sir Alistair is anticipating your arrival." The air inside was calm and dry, heavy with aged wood, leather polish, and a hint of cigar smoke. Oil paintings of bay stallions in mid-gallop, hunting hounds, cornered foxes, and men in red jackets raising silver trophies adorned the walls. The drapes were drawn against the late afternoon light as they escorted her through a panelled corridor to a library. Under a carved Whitcomb family crest, a fire blazed in a spacious hearth. Sir Alistair Whitcomb was pouring brandy into a crystal tumbler while he stood by the liquor cabinet. He said, "Miss Hartley," without looking back. "I've heard you've been really busy." Eliza remained close to the door. "I could say that about you, too." He turned, and she smiled briefly at that. He was tall, silver-haired, and immaculately dressed in a tweed suit with earth tones and a pocket square that likely cost more than her whole outfit. His eyes were like glacier-fed lakes, cold and unreadable. "You're not the first documentary filmmaker to explore Dartmoor," he remarked. "But you're the first to start a village hall debate about it, I dare say." Eliza answered, "I'm not here to cause trouble. My drone operator found tire tracks that led back toward your estate after a horse was abandoned to die, which is why I'm here." After taking a sip, he pointed to a leather chair. "Please take a seat." She remained still. "I prefer to stand." With slow, deliberate ease, he lowered himself onto the opposite chair and said, "As you wish. Miss Hartley, you know, the Moor has always drawn romantics. People who believe that wild things should stay wild, even if doing so puts them at risk of malnutrition, harm, or worse." Her eyes narrowed. "And those who believe that management equates to desertion." Sir Alistair's eyebrows went up. "I hope you're not suggesting that the unfortunate creature you discovered has anything to do with my estate." "I'm not making any inferences. I want to know. Did any Whitcomb horses go missing following the roundup last year?" He twirled his tumbler of brandy. "Miss Hartley, horses come and go. Particularly throughout the winter. A few are sold. Others disappear. It is a feature of the terrain. Rowan didn't get lost. They dragged him. As well as chipped. The incorrect chip, on purpose." Sir Alistair's lips curled slightly as he tilted his head. "That seems like something that should be handled by the authorities. Not a young lady with a YouTube channel and a camera." She was surprised by how hard that landed. He had completed his studies. Her voice tightened as she responded, "Maybe so. However, I have video. And the community is paying attention to me. I have no doubt that you do, he responded with ease. However, attention is erratic. Furthermore, communities are brittle. They might turn against you more quickly than they flocked around you, you might discover. The room's temperature decreased by several degrees. The silence was broken by a knock. After entering and whispering something to Sir Alistair, the butler left. Whitcomb got up. Well, our brief conversation has been enjoyable. However, I have a commitment. Eliza took a single pause before continuing approaching the door. If I discover evidence, I'm not going to stop. Despite his courteous grin, Sir Alistair's gaze remained piercing. I don't think you will. But don't forget, Miss Hartley. Sometimes things are best left buried when you delve too far. She didn't say anything more before leaving. The sky had become darker outside. As she traversed the gravel and got back into the Land Rover, the wind tugged at the hem of her garment. Her cell rang. Archie sent a message. I have something. Movement in the rear paddocks was captured by the drone. Come to the sanctuary as soon as possible. She drove as though the storm had passed. Archie was waiting with his laptop open and his eyes wild with adrenaline by the time she arrived at the barn. He blurted out, I didn't mean to fly over the estate. However, I was unable to save the drone after it became entangled in a crosswind. However, take a look. He pressed the play button. Before pausing on a group of smaller structures partially concealed from the main house by a line of brush, the drone's feet slid unsteadily over the estate, past paddocks and stables. Archie pointed and said, there. That one. The left-hand corner. Zooming in was the drone's camera. In a cramped corral, a little, dark horse stood tied, its back leg raised unnaturally, its ribs exposed. A faint white freeze mark, just discernible through matted hair, was seen on its shoulder when it turned slightly. There was a wooden board next to it, piled on a crate. Lightly chalked and almost smudged out. Lot 7 Ship 214. Eliza's throat was dry as she gazed at the TV. She stated, they're marking them for transport. And concealing them, Archie muttered. The ramifications strike like lightning. Not only Rowan. Not a single one. It was a system. They had just discovered its first crack. The legal investigation of Whitcomb's rear paddocks at night, the unsettling finding of several stalls and faded shipping tags, and Mrs. Sibley's odd memory, all of which tighten the noose around Sir Alistair's operation, will all be covered in Part 6. Are you prepared for Part 6 to be written? You stated. Fan 6900 Tu Du Len, Viet Lien Mach Cao Tu, Dung Quen Mon Nu Tiang Ar Mai Cho Toi Het Kak Fan, Theo Dan Y Acute Toi Da Gui. According to ChatGPT. Yes, this is Part 6, which is written in continuous American English. With a search conducted at night, eerie disclosures, and the first obvious flaw in Sir Alistair's scheme, this section heightens the suspense. Part 6, Making the Network Public. That night, the wind increased once more, but it was a colder, more covered wind rather than the loud one that pounded rooftops. It carried with it a weird quiet that made every rustling and creak sound like a warning as it whistled through the hedgerows. Eliza was standing close to the rear of the RSPCA car that was parked behind Whitcomb Hall, just off the gravel road. Inspector Maeve O'Donnell briefed two police in uniform a dozen yards away, next to a gated livestock trail that descended below the well-kept exterior of the estate. At dusk, the warrant had been authorized. O'Donnell stated in a quiet but strong voice, search is restricted to the lower paddock structures and adjacent holding sheds. Entry to the main house is prohibited without escalation. The body cams are on. Low lights. Unless we need to escalate, keep quiet. Eliza gripped her camera equipment tighter. In private, Maeve had stated, "We're going to need every angle of this, on record." O'Donnell had approved her participation as a documentarian observer, even though she wasn't law enforcement. At 10:14 p.m., they went through the side gate. Behind the hall, the estate grounds seemed like another world, more lost and less manicured. The paddocks at the back were unkempt and overgrown. Rusty implements rested on decaying brick walls. Whitcomb Hall's polished image terminated exactly where the camera light would normally miss it. Beams of flashlights danced across mud-streaked wood and tangled nets as they sliced through the darkness. Then, one officer muttered, "Here." They had arrived at the group of low, thin sheds, which were hidden between overgrown bushes and a leaning stone wall and were hardly visible from the front drive. The first stall door was pushed open by O'Donnell. There was a screech from the hinge. The terrible tang of decay and sewage filled the air inside. Clumps of old hay stuck to the ground. A worn feed pail with mold crusted over the rim, clawed-up wood, and bite marks on the post rail, were all illuminated by the flashlight beam. Then there was a horse in the next stall. Small. Black. Eyes are large and bloodshot. A pale frieze imprint on its shoulder is just discernible through the filth. O'Donnell went inside, her voice calm yet quiet. "Easy. You're fine now." She grabbed for the scanner attached to her vest. Beep. The chip is registered. But again, the details did not match. Another misidentified passport. Another falsehood. They inspected the other sheds. 3 additional horses. 2 are unshipped. One bearing a new brand over a previous freeze mark. A crate sat in the corner of one stall, its lid partially shattered. Inside, manila folders, scrawled inventory sheets, and a worn ledger book with initials and lot numbers. Behind it all is a shipping calendar. Several pages are missing. Eliza's breath tightened. This was not haphazard dumping. This was organized. O'Donnell placed everything in evidence sleeves while one of the cops radioed in for transport and veterinary inspection. Outside, near the final shed, Eliza noticed something glinting under the weeds. She crouched down and pulled out a small metal plate, similar to an auction tag. Faint chalk lines stuck to the surface, reading L13, unfit, discard. Discard? Her stomach turned. Movement begins at the field's edge. A figure appeared out of the fog, stooping, wearing a shawl and carrying a faint lamp. "Mrs. Sibley." Eliza called softly. The elderly woman nodded, her breath apparent in the chilly air. "I heard the ruckus. I've lived among these farms for 40 years. Eliza moved closer. "I figured you might know something." Mrs. Sibley gazed at the sheds, her eyes watery but piercing. "I remember a morning back in January," she told me. "Wake up early to let the fire in. I saw a horse trailer heading off. No lights are on. Just creeping down the path, as if it didn't want to be noticed. I thought that was unusual." Eliza nodded, encouraging her to continue. "The following night, another. Then nothing for weeks. Have you told anybody?" "Only the baker," she said with a faint, bitter laugh. "I didn't think much of it until I learned about your stallion. Then I started connecting the dots." O'Donnell moved closer. "Would you be willing to make a formal statement?" Mrs. Sibley maintained O'Donnell's stare. "Yes, I would. But not for me. For them." She motioned toward the sheds. "The horses. The lies are no longer buried. The transport unit arrived just after midnight. The rescued horses were sedated and gently put onto veterinarian vans. Eliza documented everything, not for sensationalism, but to capture the truth moment by moment. Before they went, Archie appeared beside her, camera slung across his breast. "You won't believe what I just found," he exclaimed, out of breath. He took out his tablet and showed a drone capture from earlier that evening, showing the final corner of the estate border. An unlit loading bay. And nearby, a larger, newer trailer was tied to a dark truck. A figure stepped into the frame. Briefly? Enough for the drone to capture the profile. Not Whitcomb. Someone younger. Sharper. "Who is that?" Eliza inquired. "I don't know yet," Archie replied. "But he's not from around here." O'Donnell stepped in, his eyes narrowed. "Get me a still frame. If there is a second layer to this, we are not only dealing with local abuse. We could be looking at an entire trafficking network." The quiet that followed was more than just shock. It was a realization. This had never been about a single stallion. Not even one estate. It was bigger. And now it is exposed. Part 7 will focus on the viral spread of Eliza's footage, media pressure, legal threats from Sir Alistair's team, and a sabotage attempt on the sanctuary, raising the personal stakes. Ready for Part 7? You said? Check out the 7900 Tu Du Len, Viet Lin Mach Cao Tu, Dung Quen Non New Tiang An Mai Cho Tua Het Kak Fan, Theo Dan Y Acute Toi Da Gui. ChatGPT stated. Of course, here comes Part 7, which is written in American English and continues flawlessly. This section discusses the huge viral response, legal retaliation, personal threats, and sanctuary sabotage, all of which put Eliza's emotional and bodily safety at risk. Part 7, Media Storm and Broken Fences. By morning, the clip had spread everywhere. Eliza had not intended for it to go viral. She'd uploaded a meticulously crafted 10-minute movie at 4 a.m., shortly after the final horse was drugged and carried from Whitcomb's covered paddocks. She presented it carefully, with a melancholy voiceover, drone footage, shed conditions, misidentified microchips, freeze marks, and the ledger. She did not mention Sir Alistair explicitly, not yet. She did not need to. The internet handled the rest. By lunchtime, the views had surpassed 700,000. By late afternoon, national radio had picked it up. At dinner, a regional TV news anchor referred to her as the quiet whistleblower who shook the estate. And by dark, the hate mail had begun. "You don't know what you're messing with. Rich people feed entire villages. Are you trying to ruin that?" Eliza Hartley, animal rights witch. But there were others too. Emails from different sanctuaries. Anonymous tips. Archived auction logs were forwarded from unknown locations. One came from a private stable worker who noticed a freeze mark on one of the rescued horses. "She belonged to us. She vanished from a winter lease field 2 months ago. We reported it. No action." Eliza sat in her trailer that night, watching at the messages, media coverage, and headlines. Fly-grazing scandal breaks in Devon. Exclusive, illegal horse dumping exposed by documentarian. RSPCA raids linked to high-profile estate. She closed her laptop and massaged her eyes. She should have felt triumphant. She did not. Instead, there was a creeping sense of dread. The kind that comes in when you flip a rock and watch everything moving underneath. The next morning, her phone rang at 6:17 a.m. sharp. "Miss Hartley," a clipped voice said. "This is Julian Harrick, legal counsel for Sir Alistair Whitcomb." She sat up straight, instantly awake. I'm calling to inform you that unless you issue a formal retraction and remove all video content referencing my client or his estate, we will proceed with defamation litigation effective immediately. Are you really threatening me? No, Ms. Hartley. I'm informing you. You have 48 hours. The call went dead. She lowered the phone as bile rose in her throat. She was not surprised. But it still shook her. 48 hours. She hardly had time to think when a smash echoed from outside, the piercing clang of metal hitting the ground. She raced from the trailer, grabbing her boots mid-stride. The barn doors swung open, one unfastened. Inside, Tom Bennett was already crouching at the fence, surveying the damage. Sabotage, he declared plainly. The wire has been cut. The gate hinge was smashed. Astra and Rowan were inside, unhurt but restless, hooves pacing the stall, eyes bright and vigilant. Eliza proceeded to soothe them, her fingertips brushing against their shoulders. They're scared, she said. Someone was here. Tom sprang up, holding up a shredded piece of fabric caught on a nail, high-end jacket material in dark green. Not local, he stated. No farmhand would wear this. Eliza looked around. The feed room's locks were breached, with a spray-painted statement scrawled across the outer wall in red. Liars burn fast. The words silenced her. She turned to face Tom. We need cameras. Now. By lunchtime, community members started arriving without being asked. Old neighbors. Young volunteers. Even hesitant farmers who had questioned her weeks before. They brought tools, lumber, buckets of nails, and portable flashlights. They repaired fences. Rebuilt the doors. Patched the holes. Someone loaned us a generator. Someone else put trail cameras. A teen girl agreed to sleep in the hayloft just in case. Priya arrived that afternoon, checked Rowan's wound, inspected Astra's eyes, and nodded quietly. They're healing, she explained. But you look like hell. Eliza smiled slightly. It's been a long few days. As the sun set, Tom brought in a new gate. Archie arrived carrying backup drives and a portable transmitter. He set up a live broadcast right outside the sanctuary's fence. Everyone needs to see what happens next, he told me. No more hiding. Eliza nodded. Let's show them how we rebuild. She wasn't expecting what occurred next. Just before dusk, Astra went out of the stall and softly nudged Rowan. He stood up, stiff yet solid, and they went together toward the new paddock fence. People looked silently as the two horses passed through the newly rebuilt gate. Someone applauded. Then another. A cheer arose. Children laughed. A woman wept gently, her hand pressed on her heart. The refuge had a name now, Hawthorn Refuge, named after the gnarled hawthorn trees that fringed the edge of the Moor close. Tom carved a sign out of reclaimed wood. Archie announced the reveal over the live feed. Thousands watched in real time. Nonetheless, the inboxes overflowed. More footage. Additional drone files. A leaked invoice from a holding yard in Dorset, with identical lot numbers. A partial manifest signed under an alias. Then, the first verifiable shipment order. Rowan's freeze mark was listed. So was the forged passport number. The document contained one signature at the bottom. AW gave his initials. It was no longer just circumstantial. They had paper trails. They had witnesses. They had a sanctuary. And the world was watching. Part 8 will feature the ceremonial inauguration of Hawthorn Sanctuary, the community's welcome, the damaging leak from an anonymous stable worker, and the final drive for legal exposure of the entire horse dumping enterprise. Should I continue with part 8? You said? Check out the 8900 TU available, as well as the MACH Cow TU from ANMI for more information. ChatGPT stated. Yes, here is part 8, written in smooth, engaging American English as always. This section represents a significant emotional and symbolic turning point, the establishment of Hawthorn Sanctuary, the community's solidarity, and the revelation of devastating proof linking everything back to the network responsible for Rowan's misery. Part 8, The Birth of Hawthorn Sanctuary. The first rays of sunshine streamed over the moor like delicate, gold paint, touching the tops of the hawthorn trees that formed the sanctuary's boundaries. The morning was silent, as if it were suspended in time, right before the first hoofbeats and the hammering began. Tom Bennett was already out in the paddock, sleeves rolled and tool belt clanking with each step. Eliza appeared right behind him, coffee in one hand and clipboard in the other. Her eyes were red after another night of editing footage and responding to emails, but her steps were solid. Determined. They had decided not to wait. Not for permissions. Not suitable for fundraisers. Not for the council's formal stamp of approval. They were going to build this place correctly and completely, and they were going to do it now. By mid-morning, volunteers started arriving in waves. A retired builder placed foundation markers for a second shelter. A farrier drove in from Tavistock to check hooves and deliver 4 crates of medical-grade hay. A young mother brought muffins and steaming tea for the crew, and her kid sat quietly with Astra, stroking her mane as if she were royalty. The truck came next. It pulled in slowly, its wheels grinding across gravel. A man in a tattered wool coat sat at the wheel, holding a clipboard under one arm. Behind him are 2 horse trailers. Inside were 4 rescues, which had been confiscated by the RSPCA from another location in Dorset the day before. Malnourished, apprehensive, and safe. Rowan whinnied as the doors opened, the first sound he had made in 2 days. Astra raised her head. She stepped forward. Eliza, Tom said. We're ready? Eliza crossed the pasture as the first horse stepped off the ramp, a chestnut mare with sunken eyes and a twisted scar on her left flank. She hesitated at the bottom of the ramp, blinking into the dawning sun. Then, with gentle grace, Astra approached her. Have no fear. There's no noise. Just a slow approach, shoulder forward, head low, until the 2 mares' noses touched. The moment was electrifying. A ripple spread across the assembled crowd. Nobody spoke. Even the children remained still. Then Astra turned, leading the mare through the new gate and into the sanctuary. The others followed one by one. Rowan remained at the far fence line, watching. Still stiff but stronger. Eliza approached him, running her hand along his shoulder. You started this, she muttered. You and her? He flicked his ears, but remained close against her palm. That afternoon, the sanctuary finally got a sign, hand-carved, sanded smooth, and fastened into position above the door. Hawthorn Sanctuary is for the forgotten, the fallen, and the free. Archie live-streamed the sign installation, and the chat was quickly swamped with hearts and comments. They deserve this. I'm donating now. Keep going. This is what the world needs more of. By sundown, a local bluegrass trio had arrived with instruments. Someone set up benches. A woman from the co-op produced lemonade. The children played tag along the paddock rail. Eliza and Priya stood together, watching Rowan graze alongside 2 of the newer arrivals. Astra reclined in the sun nearby, stretching out in a way that only horses who are entirely safe will do. This place, Priya whispered softly, it's already working. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because just as the sun began to set behind the ridge, Eliza's phone vibrated. A message? There's no name attached. Just a file attachment called Wintercut's Ledger, Confidential. She opened it. Scanned. Stopped. Page after page of notations, including horse IDs, approximate weights, feed prices, and sale tags. Then, a column labeled Recommended for Removal, Surplus Winter Stock. One of the entries contained Rowan's microchip number. The row has been highlighted. The seller's initials. AW. Another file appeared a moment later. A scanned receipt, grainy and low resolution, but clear enough. It listed 4 horses as unfit for resale and detailed offload services rendered. Destination was unknown. Date, 2 days before Rowan was discovered bleeding on the moor. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. This was it? She called O'Donnell immediately. Send it all, Maeve replied. This goes beyond circumstantial. If this holds, we will file charges this week. Multiple statutes. Animal Welfare Act. Control of Horses Act. Fraudulent documentation. What do you think? Eliza hesitated. We might be able to seize more than just horses. If there is profit involved, this becomes a criminal enterprise. Eliza turned towards the paddocks. Children laughed in the background. Horses grazed as the light faded. Someone had started a fire somewhere, and the scent of wood smoke wafted through the air. But, underneath it all, her spine tingled. Because if they only had one whistleblower and one sanctuary, how many more were there? That night, she opened her laptop and began preparing the next video. This one would name names. It would display the ledger. It would tell Rowan's story, from his first desperate cry in the storm to this very moment, safe, alive, and standing on land he would never be dragged across again. The world was still watching. However, this time the truth was backed up. Part 9 will take us to the public hearing, where legal consequences begin, key evidence is revealed, and Dr. Priya presents Rowan's injuries, all while drone footage and public outrage finally force the authorities to take action. Are you ready for me to write Part 9? You said? Check out the 9900 TU available, as well as the on my website for more information. ChatGPT stated. Absolutely, this is Part 9, which continues the immersive, uninterrupted storytelling in American English. This chapter takes us inside the high-stakes public hearing, where truths are revealed, footage is shown, and long-buried accountability is finally forced to the surface. Part 9, The Reckoning. The hearing room at the Devon District Council building was far too small to accommodate the large crowd. When Eliza arrived with Priya, Archie, and Tom, the hallway outside was already filled with murmurs and rustling jackets. Reporters positioned microphones near the doorway. Locals packed the benches, including farmers, volunteers, and even children holding hand-lettered signs reading "Horses have voices too" and "Justice for Rowan." The air was tight inside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A long table faced the chamber, where 5 council members sat in stiff-backed chairs, flanked by legal advisors and officials from DEFRA and the RSPCA. Inspector Maeve O'Donnell sat in the center. She seemed tired. But her eyes remained alert. Focused. At precisely 10 a.m., the gavel fell. This special hearing has been convened in response to recent allegations regarding the illegal abandonment, misidentification, and unauthorized movement of equines across Dartmoor and adjacent holdings, said the leading councillor. Today's evidence will determine whether formal criminal proceedings are recommended to Crown Prosecution Service. Eliza's hands were clenched around the edge of her seat. She glanced down the row. Archie was already syncing the AV connection. Priya sat next to her, dressed professionally but practical, calm as ever. They called Dr. Priya Desai first. She stepped forward and took the oath. Then, without needing to be prompted, she launched into a clinical yet quietly devastating explanation of what she'd witnessed that stormy night on the moor. Rowan's condition was critical, she said. Laceration through the muscle belly, high risk of sepsis, dehydration. He was dumped. There was no question. The location was inaccessible by accident. And he was chipped with a passport that did not match. She held up the scanned DEFRA record. Here is Rowan's microchip data, and here is the passport it falsely corresponds to, a gelding, long deceased, from a farm in mid-Wales. This was deliberate. One council member leaned forward. Are you suggesting organized fraud? I'm not suggesting. I'm confirming. Gasps rippled through the room. Eliza's stomach churned, not with fear, but with the weight of finally having it said aloud. Then came O'Donnell. She laid out the case with surgical precision. The night of the legal search. The hidden sheds. The evidence logs. The freeze marks. The forged transport manifest with the initials AW. Then she looked toward Archie. Please roll the drone footage. The projector flickered to life. First, aerials of Whitcomb's rear paddocks, which are hidden from public view. Then came the low sheds, the thin-framed horses, and the board labeled Lot 7, Ship 214. Gasps echoed again. Then, most damning of all, a captured still frame from the second trailer. A silhouetted figure caught briefly under an outdoor lamp before disappearing into shadow. Sir Alistair. The room was stunned into silence. Nobody spoke. Not the council. Not the estate agent sitting rigidly across the aisle, mouth tight as a wire. Eventually, the chairwoman cleared her throat. Miss Hartley, could you please address the hearing? Eliza arose slowly. She hadn't planned on speaking, but her hands moved almost instinctively. She walked to the front and turned toward the room, not the panel. I'm not here because I wanted to be, she said quietly but steadily. I did not set out to accuse anyone. All I did was follow a mare who noticed someone was dying in the mud. Rowan survived because of her, because of Astra. She paused, catching her breath for a half-second. And then we discovered more. Horses are branded and hidden. Documents were falsified. Children witnessed those horses being cared for. And then they saw them being rescued. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. You could say it's about the laws. Alternatively, profit. Alternatively, paperwork. But, at the end of the day, someone decided that these horses did not matter. Someone discarded them as trash. She let it hang in the air for a long time. Then she nodded once, turned, and returned to her seat. Behind her, there was a quiet applause that grew louder. The chairwoman banged the gavel but did not appear angry. The hearing will now recess for deliberation. The room emptied into the hallway, like a floodgate. Outside, reporters flocked. Cameras flashed. Eliza blinked through the frenzy. She's a filmmaker. That's her. Eliza, will you testify in court if charges are brought? Has Alistair responded to your video? She didn't respond. Not yet. There were more important issues. Back at the sanctuary, Rowan lay in the sun with 3 new rescues curled up next to him. Astra stood nearby, her tail swishing in the breeze, calm as always. Volunteers were putting down mulch. A carpenter was completing a feed shed. Tom gave her a packet. What is this? She asked. He smiled. Official non-profit registration. The Hawthorn Sanctuary is now legally recognized. We are in. She laughed briefly, stunned. Then her phone vibrated. A message from O'Donnell. The council recommends formal prosecution. Crown will review within 7 days. CPS has requested a full case file and impact statements from you and Dr. Desai. Eliza stared at the screen. She then turned back to face the horses, the land, and the people. And she knew that this was not the end. But justice was finally moving forward. Part 10 will be a powerful emotional conclusion, featuring a sunset fundraiser gala at Whitcomb Hall under new management, a symbolic resolution, and a new national policy enacted as a result of this case. Are you ready for me to write the final chapter? You said? Check out the 10900 TU available, as well as the MACH Cow TU from ANMI for more information. ChatGPT stated. Absolutely, here is part 10, the emotional and symbolic conclusion. This chapter concludes with justice, healing, and legacy, written in vivid, continuous American English prose. Let us conclude the story. Part 10, A New Legacy. The sun sank low over Dartmoor, casting soft amber light across the fields and hedgerows, as if it sensed something sacred was happening. The front gates of Whitcomb Hall, once silent and shrouded in wrought iron and suspicion, were wide open for the first time in years. Bunting fluttering in the breeze, strung between old trees. Folding chairs dotted the lawn, facing a small wooden stage, set up beneath the hill's crest. Strings of warm light ran from post to post, flickering softly as dusk fell. Eliza stood near the garden's edge, her fingers brushing against the edge of a note card she hadn't decided to use yet. She wasn't used to being here, not on manicured lawns, not in borrowed dresses, and not under banners with her sanctuary's name printed in elegant cursive. Hawthorn Sanctuary, Gala for the Forgotten. However, tonight was different. Sir Alistair Whitcomb was no longer the lord of this estate. After the charges were formally filed, the weight of public outrage became too much, sponsors withdrew, partners fled, and Alistair, facing mounting legal fees and a potential criminal conviction, stepped down and sold the estate to a private conservation trust. The new owners had invited Eliza to hold her fundraiser here, on the same property where the horses had been hidden. At first, she said no. But then she walked through the back paddocks again, this time without fear, and saw the empty sheds demolished, the ground reseeded, and the last piece of evidence leveled. That's when she said yes. The air was filled with quiet joy. Dozens of former skeptics mixed with donors and rescue volunteers. Children in the village ran barefoot near the fence lines, where Rowan stood proudly beside Astra, looking stronger than he had ever been. His coat shone in the lantern light. A garland of hawthorn blossoms was delicately draped across his withers. Tom Bennett arrived with a tray of lemonade and nodded to the audience. "You know you're going to have to speak eventually," he told me. Eliza laughed softly. "Still deciding whether to wing it or faint. I'll hold your hand either way." She nodded as she looked at him, steady, kind, and loyal until the end. A surprising figure approached from the far side of the lawn. It was the older farmer, the one who used to scowl through town meetings, arms crossed, distrust written all over his face. Tonight he held a folded check in his hands. He paused in front of her, cleared his throat, and handed it over without ceremony. "My grandkids helped with the rebuild," he mentioned. "One of those mares, the bay, follows my youngest like a dog. I thought it was time to put something in." Eliza blinked. "Thank you. Truly. Keep fighting," he said, before tipping his cap and walking away. More people arrived, neighbors, supporters, even journalists who had previously labeled her naive now shook her hand as if she had rewritten the story. And perhaps she had. because the fight had spread far beyond Devon. In the months since the charges were filed, DEFRA has launched a thorough investigation into microchip and passport abuse. Dozens of previously lost horses were discovered in holding pens, unregistered auctions, and illegal transports. And, as a result of the Whitcomb case evidence and subsequent public pressure, a new policy was developed. It passed just 1 week before tonight's gala. A mandatory national equine microchip audit, with a rolling inspection schedule, passport verification enforcement, and legal procedures for seized fly-grazing cases. It was dubbed a Hawthorn regulation. O'Donnell had sent the official document via mail, folded inside a letter that simply read. It began with 1 storm and 1 mare. Do not forget that. The lights dimmed. A bell gently rang from the stage. Eliza stepped forward. She had not prepared a speech. Not really. Only a few words, scribbled half-heartedly on a card. But, as she approached the microphone and looked out, at Astrid in the field, Rowan grazing beside the children, and the crowd that had once doubted her, she tucked the card into her pocket. My name is Eliza Hartley, she began, her voice calm and clear in the night air, and I'm not the reason any of this happened. She let the pause settle. Rowan is. And Astra. And we lost all of our horses. Everyone we rescued. Everyone who was left behind a locked gate or thrown into the mud. They made us look. We couldn't take our gaze away after that. She looked to her left, where Archie was already filming from the side of the stage. This is not about a single villain. It is not about one estate. This is about the notion that something without a voice is still worth defending. That matters. And now, thanks to your efforts, it is legally protected. More applause. Not wild. Not explosive. But warm. Steady. She stepped down from the stage. The band started to play. People danced. The lanterns swung overhead. The fire pit sparked to life. Someone handed her a warm cup of cider, and she smiled quietly, taking in the moment. Astra stood near the fence, watching her. The silver mare then approached Eliza with gentle steps, pressing her nose to her shoulder, just as she had on the first night on the moor. Eliza approached her and leaned in. Thank you, she whispered. For everything? Rowan nickered behind her, and Eliza laughed quietly. The night deepened. But the sanctuary was no longer a hazy dream in the rain. It was real. Rooted. Growing. And from now on, no one could look away.